absolutely. A few years ago, somebody delivered a canister of radioactive waste to the roof of the Japanese Prime Minister's residence in a sign of protest over the handling of the Fukushima disaster. So I think what you have is a very simple to operate aircraft that can deliver a 2-kilogram package wherever you want it. Now, folks like Amazon have a really exciting use case for that technology, but other folks have more nefarious interpretations of that. And that's the kind of threat that we counter.
And is that the main way of kind of disabling a drone then, to effectively jam its signals so that the drone goes into a kind of auto land mode or whatever it is? Are there other ways of disabling them that you're able to tell us about?
Yeah, so there are folks out there who have who have basically a net gun that shoots a giant net up that tries to capture the drone. And that's not generally favored by most military law enforcement customers for a couple of reasons. It's very short range. It's very hard. It's very directional. So if you don't hit it, it's very hard to bring it down. It still then crashes to the ground. And you have to pay for each of those nets you shoot out. So we really worked with a lot of folks in the military and law enforcement and Secret Service type user groups and asked them what they wanted. And that's where we got feedback like, well, we need the drone to come down in one piece so we can exploit the information off there.
Right, okay. So yeah, there's that aspect as well. So you can get the drone in one piece, as it were, and then you can do lots of analysis. Andrew Saxon, this is fascinating, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Great stuff. So we're going to go over to Niger now and the plight of rice farmers who really have a hard time when the rains come. Especially last year, there was an especially wet and destructive rainy season. So in a region that's so prone to flooding, there's a volunteer effort to map the floodplain. It's a task that the project's organisers say has never been done before. Now the volunteers are using smartphones armed with GPS and a data gathering app. The information is all being added together and then uploaded to OpenStreetMap, which is a collaborative mapping platform. It's a bit like Wikipedia, but for mapping. Incidentally, OpenStreetMap celebrates its 14th birthday this weekend. Well, Sasha Gankin has been hearing more about that project to map Niger's floodplain from Fatima Alher, who's a geography master's student, and she also advises the World Bank on the flood risk in Niger.
Le Niger est un pays sahélien avec un climat de type tropical.
Niger has a tropical climate. It's arid and floods are very frequent. If we take, for example, the capital, Niamey, we're used to 2 types of floods, river floods and rain floods. I've been exploring this subject since my first year at university in the geography faculty. I looked at floods from a cartographic point of view, and I launched myself into cartography through OpenStreetMaps.
What kind of damage usually the population face during the inundation here in Niamey and in Niger?
Les dégâts des inondations sont vraiment énormes.
The damage is enormous. First, in the huge number of human casualties resulting from the floods. Then there's the psychological damage. People lose their homes, their families, their savings. After that kind of psychological trauma, people have difficulty reintegrating into society. Imagine the impact on people who live close to riverbanks. The floods destroy their entire agricultural land. And so these families end up with nothing. Their houses destroyed, their rice plantations and their livestock all gone.
Are you engaged emotionally in your project?
Oui, bien sûr que vraiment c'est ce qui m'a poussé même à s'intéresser.
Of course, this was the true reason, my compassion for this vulnerable population, to bring these people and their plight to the attention of the authorities. With cartography, the truth cannot be denied because we have geolocation.
What was your method of collecting data?
Actually, it started even before this project in 2012. I joined the OpenStreetMap international community and we started to map Niamey. We organised a mapathon, bringing youngsters together to collect the data of a neighbourhood and create a database.
How many people can be involved in a mapathon?
Si nous organisons des mapathons, nous faisons des publications sur les réseaux sociaux. Donc il y a des pays.
When we organise a mapathon, we share it on social media, and there are contributors from other parts of the country and even other West Africa OpenStreetMap communities who join us remotely. Here in Niamey, we can gather up to 20 people. We're using smartphones with a questionnaire and images captured by drones integrated in the app. We're able to get a sense of the vulnerability of a house, an idea of the materials used for construction, the slope of the land, and precise geolocation. Once inside a house, the investigator first takes the geolocation with the app. The image from the drone is a good starter for follow-up questions on the kind of bricks used, cement, clay or mud, and most importantly, we need details on the number of inhabitants, how many vulnerable people, etc. We ask how people want to be alerted in the event of floods. In the past, it would have been by radio, TV, or even griots. But now, with the proliferation of mobile phones, why not do it with an app?
Maybe allowed by text messaging.
Oui, parce qu'on a pris leur numéro. Avec ce numéro de téléphone.
Sure, because we also collect their mobile phone numbers. If we have information on an impending crisis, or rising river levels, or floods, we send a text 2 to 3 days in advance to give them time to prepare. We just finished this project, and the World Bank, which funded it, is about to extend it to other African cities like Bamako in Mali. They realised how important it is to collect data after our project, which was the first ever study in this domain made in Africa.
That's Fatima Alha, whose word obviously there were translated. She was talking to Sasha Gankin in Niger, and Bill Thompson was listening.
And really sort of very enthusiastic about this sort of project. We've talked about OpenStreetMap many times on this programme over the years, and it is such an important thing, sort of as an initiative. I think in many ways it's much more valuable than almost any other open source project I can think of, because it really does transform people's lives, saves people's lives. And we've looked at ways in which information is collected in areas that might have natural disasters or might be subject to famine and stuff like that, where you get the data in advance and then you can move relief supplies around more effectively, you can advise people, and that's precisely what's happening here. It's so important that this project can happen, and it's led by local people who understand what's going on. And now they have the right tools in their hands to do it. They can do it reliably and much more easily, as we heard from Fatima there.
Yes, there is that data gathering app, for instance, and that's all open source as well. So people designing projects have a way of sending people out to the field to gather geolocated data. And I've used OpenStreetMap at times where the other kind of mainstream mapping services are actually quite poorly mapped in some areas, and you get more on OpenStreetMap.
You do, because it's areas where the community cares, and also the fact that you can contribute to it remotely makes a difference as well. So it's the sort of thing where people talk about clicktivism. I did my thing with my fingers, activism that's just clicking on links or signing online petitions,
or inspired by the name of this program,
or indeed inspired by the name of this program. This is actually online activism that really makes a difference, because you can sign up, you can take on tasks, you can spend your time looking at satellite imagery and mapping it. Anyone can make a difference and contribute to this sort of project, and it really does help people, and it saves lives.
Great, Bill, thank you. Well, finally, it's not the kind of welcome you'd want when you get to New Zealand. A hefty fine because you've got about that bit of fruit in your hand luggage. New Zealand's kiwi fruit industry was devastated a few years ago by a virus that had somehow come into the country, and much of the country's flora and fauna is unique, with over 70,000 native species, so no wonder that New Zealand is rightly pretty strict about the foodstuffs that come in. So now there's a project to help biosecurity officers identify potential invasive species, or perhaps to help farmers ID that new weed that's suddenly sprung up in the paddock. This report from Simon Morton.
A new report warns an uncontrolled invasion of the Asian stink bug would devastate New Zealand's fruit, vegetable and wine industries, destroying more than $4 billion of export value. More than 100 brown marmorated stink bugs were found last
Another story about an invasive pest reaching the shores of New Zealand. And along with bugs and creepy crawlies, there's a real threat from fungi, bacteria, as well as other organisms. Varvara Petrova is a lecturer in the School of Mathematics and Statistics at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch. She's working with a team from the fields of biology, computer science and vision and applied machine learning to keep New Zealand pest-free.
So the basic idea of our project is to be able to identify automatically invasive species which might be dangerous to New Zealand ecosystem if they, for example, come through container ships or through the border control. So we are building this algorithm which can address this issue of identifying new species.
So in practice, a farmer might see a strange weed growing in a field, take a photo on a phone or use some images taken from a drone, and then have the biosecure ID system identify the species.
The algorithm is based on data sets of images which were taken beforehand and supplied in some kind of form to our researchers. So we are trying to address problem here that classically those algorithms require lots of images. However, it's not very practical in a setting of biosecurity, or for example, in farmers to go in the field and collect, let's say, 10,000 images of plants, because that will be very cost ineffective. So what we're trying to do here, we're trying to build an algorithm which will require only a small amount of images to be able to capture the differences between species of organisms.
So how do you train a system to accurately identify a new species of animal or plant based on only 30 images taken in a lab?
So we are using knowledge transfer in our studies, which is in a way it's a little bit like people learning from each other when they take a problem and learn from another person knowledge and apply that knowledge to the problem in hand, and those problems in the first place might be not very related. So in a similar way, networks can learn from each other, and we're using this technique to be able to help us to address problem of small data sets. So we learn information from another network and apply that information in our algorithm.
The application, which is still in development, uses the iNaturalist network. It's a crowd-sourced database where people report, share, and then discuss organisms to speed up the identification process. What's known in neural networks as knowledge transfer. So how accurate is the system today? Well, based on early trials with plants that look fairly similar, ones that even experts have problems telling apart, the system was 80% accurate.
And also we tried our system on identification in terms of family of organisms, and for family level it was around 90% accurate. One of the features of our project also is ability to identify new species. So for example, if something is arriving at the border, or let's say there was a new invasive plant in the farm, so a system can raise an alarm and say, oh look, this is not in our database. We potentially need to send this image to an expert to identify. So we're doing it without querying the database extensively. So it's all quite fast.
And in the future, systems like this could be used to measure biodiversity and ultimately protect places from invasive pests that threaten the long-term health of our ecosystems.
That report from Simon Morton. He says data, we say data, because it's a wonderful world. Bill Thompson.
He does. Coincidentally, I'm just reading a book called Flights, translated by Jennifer Croft from Olga Tokarczuk's original, and one of the key characters in it is someone who works in biodiversity in New Zealand, trying to get rid of possums and other invasive species. So this is incredibly relevant and really important, because if we can track things down more accurately and therefore respond more speedily and also, sort of more accurately to things like this, you can make a real difference to it. Interesting enough, of course, there are sort of plant recognition apps out there already. There's things like Picture This, which does use machine learning, and there's one called Smart Plant, which actually sends your photo of a plant to an expert who will then look at it, sort of like Mechanical Turk style. They'll be tasked to identify the plant that Gareth saw in the garden or whatever and get back to you with their best advice. Because the key thing about this is you don't want too many false positives, but also crucially you don't want to miss stuff, and it's going to be all about the training data and making it more and more reliable. That's what really counts with this.
Excellent, Bill. Thank you for that. And would you look at the time? We need to leave it there. That's Bill Thompson, the producer's Colin Grant. I'm Gareth Mitchell, and we'll see you next week, folks. Take care and goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service, and on this week's assignment... In January, a 29-year-old Dutch woman lay down to die. Aurelia Brouwers was approved for euthanasia on account of unbearable psychological suffering.
I'm Linda Bresley. Join me to hear Aurelia's story.
Journeys to the heart of a story. Assignment, Thursday at 12:30 and 21 GMT. And at bbcworldservice.com, The Conversation.
Can translating a book from one language into another be a feminist act? Two literary translators from Egypt and the UK explain why it matters that more women are translating texts.
Next, it's Newsday, here on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Here in London. Hello and welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Lawrence Pollard and Shaima Khalil.
Our top story this time, President Trump declares a major disaster in California. It's the worst wildfires in the state's history, and now forecast to burn until the end of the month.
A one-time hostage of the so-called Islamic State comes face to face with his former captors, who are now in jail.
I don't accept for my picture be taken to be used because I don't even know who you are.
And the elections in the US that will tell us how support for President Trump holds up across the country, their primaries, their governor's elections. We get the latest on those. And also the sport and the business all coming up here on Newsday after the latest stories.
I'm Stuart McIntosh with the BBC News. Hello. The new president of Colombia and the country's youngest ever leader, Ivan Duque, has promised to unite what he called a divided nation. He was speaking just after his inauguration. Mr. Duque said his priority was to toughen a peace accord with the FARC former rebels. Luis Fajardo from BBC Monitoring in Miami described the Colombian president's main priorities.
A lot of people are going to watch very carefully what he does about this ongoing peace process with the demobilized FARC rebels. And a lot of people were expecting a very, perhaps, radical speech, but I think the general tone of his address was one of seeking bridges with other parts of the political world in Colombia. Another major issue is the situation with Venezuela. President Duque has made no mystery about the way he dislikes Venezuelan President Maduro, and he also mentioned that today in his speech, saying that Colombia would not be afraid to speak out against someone who they believe is attacking Venezuelan democracy. Of course, he also made a point of saying that it would be done in a peaceful way.
Security officials have arrested a Venezuelan opposition lawmaker, Juan Requesens, after President Nicolas Maduro publicly accused him of involvement in the explosive drone attacks against him at the weekend. Mr. Requesens was detained with his sister Rafaela, a student leader, though she was released later. Human rights groups have condemned the presidential amnesty granted on Monday to about 800 people in Ivory Coast. Charles Haviland has more details.
The 11 rights organisations, which include Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, said there should be no pardon for those responsible for war crimes or other serious human rights violations. The mass pardon applies mainly to associates of the former president Laurent Gbagbo, jailed for their role in months of deadly violence that followed his refusal to leave office after losing an election in 2010. Among them is his wife, Simone Gbagbo, who's to be freed on Wednesday from her 20-year sentence.
Early results from the U.S. state of Ohio indicate that the Republican candidate Troy Balderson is edging towards a narrow victory over his Democratic rival Danny O'Connor for a seat in the House of Representatives. Here's our North America reporter, Anthony Zerka.
We're waiting for just some provisional ballots to be counted, and Balderson, the Republican, has a lead of just a hair under 1 percentage point. And Donald Trump has already tweeted out claiming victory and also claiming credit for the win, saying that his visit over this weekend to hold a rally for Balderson pushed him over the line after a slow start. These results do show a trend towards the Democrats. This was a seat that Donald Trump won in 2016 by 11 percentage points, and the incumbent who was running in 2016, he beat his Democratic opponent by over 30 percentage points. So it's a pretty remarkable swing towards the Democrats.
World News from BBC. The former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak has pleaded not guilty to 3 new charges of money laundering brought against him on Wednesday. The charges relate to fraudulent activity involving more than $10 million. He faces up to 15 years in jail for each charge if found guilty. He denies wrongdoing. The governing coalition in the Democratic Republic of Congo is expected to name its presidential candidate in the coming hours. President Joseph Kabila held talks to discuss the matter with party officials on Tuesday. Mr. Kabila, who should have left office 2 years ago, is constitutionally barred from another term, though he hasn't publicly said he won't stand again. Australian scientists will test drive 2 cars on Wednesday using carbon-free hydrogen derived from ammonia in what they say is a breakthrough technology for environmentally friendly motoring. The team is from the Australian government's research agency, the CSIRO. Phil Mercer reports from Sydney.
CSIRO researchers have found a way to use a thin membrane to turn Australian-made hydrogen into ammonia, a colourless gas. This means it could be shipped safely to markets in Japan, South Korea and Singapore, as well as parts of Europe. At its destination, the ammonia is converted back into hydrogen. Scientists say the highly flammable gas creates a low-emission fuel for cars. The Australian team described the technology as a watershed moment for energy.
A medical university in Japan that was accused of systematically discriminating against female applicants has now admitted that it did so, and for much longer than previously thought. To limit the number of women, the Tokyo Medical University reduced the test scores of female applicants, even boosting the scores of some male aspirants. Investigators found the practice began as long ago as 2006. BBC News.
Many thanks for the latest. Hello and welcome to Newsday. Lawrence and Shima with you this morning. Our top story.
In the next hour we'll be hearing from a reporter who's been going back into a devastated city in California. Tens of thousands displaced, hundreds of homes destroyed. Also from the States, there's some interesting elections with some pointers to the crucial midterms on the way.
And a one-time hostage of the so-called Islamic State comes face to face with his former captors who are now in jail. More on that in just a moment. We start in the United States and those wildfires which continue to wreak havoc across the state of California. Fire officials now say that California's biggest wildfire on record is expected to keep burning for the rest of August.
Yeah, the Mendocino Complex fire, as it's called, has already covered an area bigger than the size of New York, officials saying only about a third of it is fully under control. It's one of 18 wildfires facing firefighters in California at the moment. Strong winds, low humidity, bad news for their work. Sam Harnett is a reporter with KQED in California. Now, he's been covering a set of fires known as the Car Fire. They were mainly around and in the city of Redding in the north of the state.
So the Car Fire caused almost 40,000 people to get displaced from their homes, and now people are starting to go back. Repopulate is actually the term, and some of the neighborhoods in Redding were entirely burned, so some people are going home to nothing. There were over 1,000 structures destroyed by this fire alone. And there's just, I guess, a feeling of desperation. I mean, Redding is a city of about 100,000 people. It's 3.5 hours north of San Francisco. It's in a rural place. People tend to forget that California is a big state and it's very rural. And this is a place that has been suffering of late. I mean, a lot of the people in and around Redding, there's been a lot of income inequality. Income inequality has kind of been on the rise since the 70s. A lot of jobs have been shipped overseas. A lot of people in and around Redding working trucking, or they work in the service industry. People here are taking a hit. I say income inequality is pretty high, and this is just yet another thing that they're going to have to deal with.
That's not a story that we hear about that often. In terms of who's going to sort of help foot the bill, what happens? Are people, when they're left with nothing, do you mean they're left with nothing? Are they likely to be insured? Will they have help either from state or federal authorities?
Well, this is America, and there's a lot of onus put on the individual to take care of themselves. And if you don't have adequate fire insurance, if you don't have rental insurance, which a lot of poor people don't have, then you're going to be in really tough luck. And I'd say, from my experience covering the Car Fire, I spoke with a lot of people at evacuation centers who were really worried about that. I spoke with one woman. She's a single mom. She has 2 kids, and she did not have fire insurance on her trailer. She lived in a trailer. There's a bunch of people who who are living in trailer parks, and she didn't have insurance, so she could really have to start over again from total scratch. And I also will say, again, this is a lot of the fires burning up and down the state are in rural California. They're in places that are dealing with poverty and income inequality. They're places that are dealing with opiate addiction, and they're places that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in the past election. And this is sort of the picture of these places. There's been a lot of research that has shown when there is a natural disaster, the people that suffer the most are poor people.
There's also the effect, isn't there, as well, that when you have a natural disaster, people will be grateful if the state steps forward and helps. I mean, this is an opportunity for anyone who wants to get gratitude from these people to get it. Is anyone stepping forward, or are people really kind of just left to their own devices?
You know, the city of Reading and a populace that voted for Trump are now faced with a situation where they really need assistance from the government. And right now there's a government power that's working to remove assistance.
When you have conversations with the people, do they have ideas of why it's happened? That's a question that we're all asking. They're caught up in it. It's now 2 or 3 days since they've been able to go back and see the damage. What are they saying in their conversations about why this is happening? Is it just bad luck, or is it more than that?
I think there's a real feeling that something has changed, and I think a lot of feeling has to do with the extreme weather. I mean, California has been suffering drought year after year. There's been increased high temperatures. You know, this July was one of the highest on records again, which is bad for wildfire. Strong winds. So there's a feeling that climate change and increased extreme weather is playing into these increased fires. And I will say there's a little bit of a sick irony here, because a lot of the people in rural California have suffered economically because of their jobs being shipped overseas, because of some of the forces of global capitalism and consumerism. You know, a lot of the people up there are now working in the trucking industry or the service economy. You know, they're working at, let's say, a Walmart. So they're sort of suffering because of consumerism and globalization, and a lot of consumption of globalization and consumerism is leading to greenhouse gases being released, which is leading to global warming, which is leading to increased violent weather, which is, you know, again, causing poor people to suffer. You know, the woman, you know, who's living in poverty, who's scraping by, working 2 jobs, I don't think she's theoretically making that connection. But I tell you what, people I talked with up there, they were frustrated, they were upset, and they were saying things like, well, you know, if I lose my trailer, I do not know what I'm going to go back to.
That's Sam Harnett, a reporter with KQED, who's been talking to some of the tens of thousands of people who've been going back into the city of Reading in the north of the state after it suffered considerable damage and devastation because of those wildfires.
The kidnapping and murder of journalists and aid workers by the militant group, the so-called Islamic State, brought the group's depravity and brutality to the world's attention. Ricardo Villanova, a Spanish photographer, was one of their captives, held alongside Britain's Alan Hanning and David Haynes. American hostages, including the journalist James Foley, were held at the same time.
Now, the tormentors were a group of 4 jihadists dubbed the Beatles by their captives because the quartet spoke in British accents. Ricardo Villanova was eventually freed. The IS gang tortured and murdered as many as 27 people, including almost every one of their British and American hostages.
Mr. Villanova hasn't spoken before about his incarceration, but in this exclusive report, he returns to Syria with our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville to find the former prisons where he was held and the men accused of keeping him captive.
Ricardo Garcia Villanova is a Spanish photojournalist. He was held in Syria for 7, nearly 8 months by the so-called Islamic State and by a particular group that became known for their extreme brutality. Their captors called them the Beatles on account of their British accents. 3 of those accused are still alive. One of them is in jail in Turkey, but 2 others are in prison here in northern Syria. Ricardo, where are you and where are you going?
We are in the border and we will to enter to Syria again.
This is a good part, right? Crossing over, going back in. You love Syria?
For me, it's something personal, you know, because I have a lot of friends inside.
Okay, I'll let you get on with your body armour and loading your bags.
Okay, thank you.
Before you get to meet any prisoners here in northeastern Syria, you have to sign a legal agreement, a list of do's and don'ts, that you will not force the detainee to answer any questions under any circumstances, that you will not ask questions about his location. Ricardo, what's your reaction to those rules?
The problem for me that it's not the same. For me it's amazing that that these guys have more rights than the people that they kill.
Further downriver, Ricardo crosses to South Raqqa. 19 hostages were held together, including Britain's Alan Henning and David Haynes. Their shoes were taken away and they were handcuffed together to prevent escape. It's baking hot in Raqqa now. When they were imprisoned here, it was freezing cold. Ricardo was moved more than a dozen times. He thinks he's found the location of one of the jails.
This is the right place, but we don't know exactly what it is because maybe the house is there, but the problem that maybe it was destroyed.
The house is on. Like many IS locations, it was taken out by a coalition airstrike. The prisoners called their 4 British jailers the Beatles. The US government alleges that the men waterboarded, crucified, and killed as many as 27 prisoners. Ricardo explains the jihadists slept in the next room.
This is the same place. We are here in the room and Beatles sleep there, and we have the toilet there, and it's all on the second floor.
Ricardo has brought me to the main stadium in Raqqa. This was the main IS prison, and we're now underneath the stands. Just above these doorways it says Brothers Prison. Ricardo wants to take some photographs. IS tortured and executed countless numbers of people here, not just foreigners, many Syrians too.
Yeah, we spent 3 months here in a cell like that, 3 people.
This place stands as a monument to so-called Islamic State's cruelty. And we've seen in a lot of the prison cells here there are messages recording names, times, days spent, even a workout routine. And one is bleeding, where is Sharia? This is Ricardo's 4th trip to Syria this year, and it's his most important. He wants to meet the men suspected of being his jailers. In a room at an undisclosed location, we can see Alexander Koti and El Shafi El Sheikh through a window. Ricardo says they're cowards who fled the battlefield. In a small office, just a metre apart, they sit opposite each other.
I have a couple of questions for you. It's okay? You can answer?
Depends who you are. Who are you?
I am a journalist. I am a photographer.
I don't accept for my picture be taken to be used because I don't even know who you are and what purposes you're going to use. So I don't think you in any pictures or using them in any way.
The men refuse to answer Ricardo's questions. Before he leaves, he takes a final picture through the window. They push it closed, wanting to shut him out. Afterwards, he explained what the meeting meant to him.
I wanted to see the suspects and look them in the face. That's it. The first thing I thought when I saw them was Gaddafi or Saddam. They were able to torture and murder, but when the limits arrived, they handed themselves in order to survive. I think that's despicable.
Should they face the death penalty?
No, yo no creo en la pena de muerte. Yo creo que...
No, I don't believe in the death penalty. But I think they should spend the rest of their lives in prison, and in the same conditions they kept their hostages.
O torturadas durante todo ese tiempo en sus cárceles.
Raqqa, a city in ruins, is now getting back on its feet. The rubble from the war is being cleared. Just a month after being freed, Ricardo Villanova went back to work. There in Raqqa he stands in the blinding sunlight and takes pictures. He never wanted to become a part of the story, he only wanted to record it. Yet he had the strength and the opportunity to survive, and more than that, he's shown the courage to return here so that these dark horrors won't be forgotten.
That's Quentin Somerville, and I have to say, his pictures, Ricardo García Villanova, are well worth checking out as well. Go and give them a look if you have time. Ricardo Garcia Villanova, who's there with Quentin, going back back to the scene of some horrors that they both witnessed in Syria. Many thanks indeed to them both for that report.
This is Newsday on the BBC World Service, coming up to 20 minutes past the hour. Just a reminder of our top stories this morning. The newly sworn-in president of Colombia, Ivan Duque, has vowed to toughen up a peace accord with the former FARC rebels. International rights groups have strongly criticized an amnesty for 800 prisoners in the Ivory Coast, and the Republican candidate appears to be heading for a narrow victory over his Democratic rival in a by-election in Ohio, seen as a mini-referendum on President Trump. Let's get sports headlines now with Mike Williams.
Hi, Shama. Well, you might remember 48 hours ago, the Ivory Coast's Marie-José Talu won the sprint double at the African Athletics Championships in Nigeria. Well, one of the biggest rivals for world and Olympic titles responded on Tuesday in the perfect way.
And they're underway, and Dina Asher-Smith gets a terrific start and already outpaces Kambunji and skippers towards her left.